Thank you everybody for joining us for our event on storytelling. I just want to kind of introduce the mentorship program a little bit. Probably most people on here are familiar with it or participating, but just in case there's a who's not familiar with it, the BPMA mentorship program is an opportunity for folks to learn from each other and to build community. And we have two tracks. We have one for one-on-one mentorship, which is designed for people who are already in the field and wanting to advance their career some more. And then we have a second track for aspiring and job-seeking folks to get some advice on their job search or to get some advice on getting into product management. And the job seeking, the aspiring track is essentially allows you to get a series of like 1 hour or half-hour phone calls with a few different folks to get kind of a sample of what folks in the field have to say, get some advice from some different people. The one-on-one mentorship track is designed to be kind of a longer ongoing relationship. If anybody is not currently on here or any alum who are interested in becoming mentors, you can find more information about the mentorship program at the website, products.org. Go to career and then mentorship, and there is lots more information there. With that, I think I will introduce our two speakers today. Lynn Levy and Shobit Chugh, who are very experienced product managers who are going to tell us about storytelling today. And the way it's going to work is that they are going to do some talking, and then they're going to field questions. So if anybody has questions on storytelling throughout the presentation or at any time, go ahead and put them into the group chat, and we will get to as many of them as we can. And then after those folks are done with that part of the event, we're going to go into breakout rooms so we can discuss storytelling further in smaller groups. So,
all right.
Yes, take it away.
Thank you, Melissa. So Shobit and I will introduce ourselves, and then we'll ask you folks a couple questions. So
I also forgot to introduce the rest of the mentorship group, which is me, Lynn, Nina Mitchell, and Anil, who are also on the call. Sorry, go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you, Melissa. All right, good morning. Happy Tuesday. Happy Tuesday in June. I don't know about you folks, but last time I looked, it was March. So my name is Lynn Levy. I am a product leadership coach, and my goal is to help product managers do what they love what they do. So I'll turn it over to Shobit to introduce himself.
Hey folks, I'm Shobit. I'm a product manager at Google, and I'm a product management coach as well. My goal is really to help people intentionally redesign how they do their job so that they can have a career that they can just be proud of.
Thank you. So I would love everybody, throw in the chat. I really want to use the chat today. Tell us, when you think about storytelling, what are some of the challenges you have? When you hear the word, tell a story, what makes you go, ugh? And I'd love everybody just to put one or two reactions in the chat. And as a note, what we're talking about is not storytelling from like an agile perspective, but the bigger picture storytelling. Mike, too much detail. That's a good one. I call that too much sausage making. Lots of
buzzwords.
Yes. What kind of messaging? Inauthentic, canned. Yes, we'll talk about a lot of these. All right, thank you guys for throwing just a couple comments in there. So we're going to start. One of the most important stories you have is your own story. So Shobit and I, we're each going to tell you our personal story that I tell back when I was a director of product. I use it when I would introduce myself to customers, various versions of it. But let me tell you a little bit about my story. So I grew up in the 80s, and my dad was actually a product manager back for United Technologies. And every day at 6 o'clock, my sisters and I would be hanging out in the kitchen, starving. For me, I was at swimming all afternoon, and I never knew what kind of dad would come home. My dad would come home stressed, anxious. Some days he could barely talk. Thinking to myself, how the heck am I going to get my chemistry homework done? You know, my dad just had an awful day. Sometimes he would come home angry. And he worked in a toxic environment. He worked in a top-down command and control environment. And that type of culture impacted him. And my dad's brilliant. He's got patents. He's brilliant. But that type of culture in the world of product impacted his ability to innovate, impacted our dinner table every night. It's a big deal. And I swore I would never work in that environment again. Lo and behold, boom, I'm working in a toxic culture. I'm not going to name the company, here in the Boston area. And I realized that the more toxic an environment, the less innovation that happens, regardless of the personal impacts and the family impacts. But how can you innovate when you walk around in a contracted state, in a state of fear? So my mission is not only to help product managers do what I love, but create a generation of leaders that understand we have to treat each other as human beings with value to drive innovation. So that's a little bit about my story. All right, go ahead, Shobit.
Linda, that was awesome. I'll tell you my story, but I think like when Lynn and I spoke last week, and we both told each other like stories, we sort of realized that we're on a similar path, similar journey, similar mission. So my story, a little bit more recent. So, you know, throughout my career, I've always been pretty good, you know, kicked ass, was a top performer, was a good engineer, did my MBA, went to McKinsey, all good. Until one of my product management roles, the main challenge there was that I sucked. I was awful. In fact, at the end of the year, I was told that, Shobit, you failed to establish a vision, that you had not performed according to expectations. And, you know, this is during that performance review that happens right in December, wonderfully right before the holidays. So I spent the entire holidays just like mulling over with a fake smile on what the hell had gone wrong. And what I come to realize was that ultimately I had let my job run me rather than me running the job. Like I did everything what everybody told me to do rather than stand up for what I knew was the most important thing. And that's when I decided never again. And I went through this whole development journey of looking well beyond product management stuff to figure out how do I take control of this job. And by the end of the next year, I was the top performer at the company. And that really got me into a journey of, I need to spread this word, because everything that's out there, like there's millions of, well, maybe not millions, but lots of articles on Medium. Google can give you all the information, but it doesn't seem to be working for product managers. And so that's what got me into a journey of teaching and coaching. That's my story.
I love it. And my guess, Shobit, that Christmas was not or that holiday season was probably not a lot of fun after that bad performance review.
The worst one ever.
Yeah. So tell us, folks, you both heard two stories from us. What words, when you think about it, what were some of the attributes of the story that you heard? Oh, Dave, go ahead. Well, let's popcorn it, guys. Just speak it out loud. Oh, I can't hear you, Dave.
And growing. You guys each described a situation that you encountered, an action that you took, and the result of that action.
Absolutely, the SAR model.
Sometimes referred to as SAR.
I heard a hook for both of them. I was like wondering how it was going to go.
We brought you in, right?
I'm watching the chat. Somebody saying pain, Mike saying pain, and I agree. Like, yeah.
There was emotion in there.
Yeah, there was emotion.
Yeah.
Adapting and growth mindset. Absolutely. We both took our situations and said, what can we do to evolve ourselves and to change?
Yeah, Stephen says some.
Oh, go ahead, Shobit. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was just saying Stephen said something we've all gone through, like the relatability aspect here.
Do you guys feel like you were part of the story? Like you wanted, like you could see my dinner table waiting me really needing help on my chemistry homework, and for Shobit that awful holiday season. So the thing about stories is neither of us used any data. Okay, you didn't hear one metric from us. It was emotional. Okay, so that is really the key to storytelling. So Shobit and I are going to go through kind of a quick discussion on some ideas on storytelling. Let's use the chat, ask questions, and hopefully, we gave our introduction initially. We're coaches, we're leadership coaches, do what you love what you do. But when we added that story, it became much more real. Like you understood who we were and what we were about. And imagine the power that can take in the world of product when you're talking about your product that way. All right, so let's kick it off. So Shobit, tell us, in the world of product, why do you need stories? What's the value?
So let's separate out two, like your product stories and your stories. And I think we'll come to your stories really soon. But in my mind, the reason why you need stories in product is really three reasons. So number one, a sense of belief that when you are inspiring your team, your stakeholders, how do you make sure they believe you? And that comes from knowing that not just you care, but there is this customer that is really impacted by what your product does. It's not going to be like 27% of our customers use this feature. No one cares. But Melissa, woke up and the first thing she did using our app was check this. And then, suddenly now everyone's drawn in. So people believe it. They remember it. Right, the stories we tell, it's just something that people remember, and you need to draw the same message over and over again in the world of product, especially as you are, as we love to say, leading without authority. That's one of the reasons why you fundamentally need stories to bring people in.
So can I add something to that, Shobit?
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's interesting, guys, when you look at the brain. When you throw a slide, and just think about it, when you're in a presentation and somebody throws a slide of data in front of you, I don't know about you, I don't remember it. But when somebody tells you a story, and not just a story that's emotive, that Melissa woke up, half asleep, kids running around, but she's got to check her email. That's a visual. Okay, we can put ourselves there. So the story, it literally will light up the brain the more you can take the person into exactly what that persona is doing. All right, go ahead, Shobit. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that was it. Len, you want to add more on why we need stories?
Absolutely. So stories actually allow decisions to be made. People actually don't make decisions based on data. We can say 100 times, we make data-driven decisions. We make data-driven decisions. But the reality, the way our brain works, is we have to understand the emotions of the story and believe it And then what we actually do is then we have to back it up with data. So you do need both, but the story comes first. So when you're talking,
Can you tell us?
When you're talking to engineers, what you need to do is you need to tell the user story of what they're doing. I remember when I worked in call center software back at Aspect in Chelmsford, I would tell the story of an agent in the call center, not just what they were doing, but the fact that they were an hourly worker, the fact that a lot of them had kids at home, that they had supervisors who were micromanaging them, who were dealing with anxiety and stress because it's awful to have people in your ear all day. So, and I would describe that to engineers. So from an engineering perspective, it really helps them understand the context. And when they understand the context, they're going to build better software.
I was going to also tell a story about what you just mentioned. So back when I was working in consulting at McKinsey, like McKinsey slides are basically the opposite of what would be storytelling slides. They're data rich, they're data everything. But even there, the whole deck is sort of, it's a story. And you're trying to tell it through the use of data. And I remember having a conversation with one of the partners, and I was like, oh, this is what the data is telling us. And he said, well, can you make it tell this story? Not like, like lie, but the fact is that we know what the client needs to do. And with the same data, they could come to 7 different decisions. And what we need is this narrative because we know it's going to work for them. And now where does the data fit in there rather than it leads the decision? So you can't like go completely against the data, but you can use it to tell your story.
So that is a really, really good point. And Melissa has a great question. How do you put emotion into a story on a product? You guys, from a product management perspective, you have to be on the road. The only way you're going to get stories about users is to actually go see them. Go understand exactly what they're dealing with. Go especially in the B2B world, understand their context of the environment they're working in. Because from a product perspective, the stories are going to come from the fact that you visited American Express, you were talking to the CHRO, and here's the challenge he or she was dealing with. I tell product managers, in general, product managers need to be talking to customers every single day. And that's how you're going to get the stories. And that's how you're going to get the emotion. Because you shouldn't just be asking tell me about this feature or this business problem. You need to understand the context.
Yeah, there's a question around storytelling slides. And I guess I have one answer to that, which is to just let the slide be a visual, and you are the storyteller. So remember, it's you giving the presentation, not the presentation speaking for itself. And I personally just love the case where the slide is a visual, or it's got like 3 data points that help you give that narrative, rather than read the slides and then sort of just follow that along.
Seriously, guys, people remember pictures. They don't remember data. So another thing to think about is coherence of your stories. So let's talk about this from the perspective of a product, and then we'll talk about it from the perspective from a brand, your personal branding perspective. You need to make sure you've got the company strategy, your product vision and themes, and then your stories, right? They should all be in alignment. And when they're not in alignment, that's when things can go awry from a revenue perspective, from a sales perspective, from a strategic perspective. You need to make sure things are well aligned. So when you're talking to leadership about a release or leadership about a roadmap, you're telling stories. When you're talking to engineers, you're telling stories. And those stories, again, need to be coherent in terms of the business problems they're solving, in terms of the user problems, and the strategic problems. So,
Yeah.
Rohit, what are your thoughts on this whole coherence concept?
There's also, to your point, Lynn, which is there's almost a story at every level. If you're talking about company strategy, sometimes what happens is that it gets lost. If there's no story on that level itself, then engineers don't relate with it. Your team doesn't relate with it. And
Can you guys hear him, or is it me?
Oh.
There we go. That's better.
Can you hear me?
You're breaking up a bit.
How about now?
Much better.
Yep. Okay. Headphones. Okay. So I was saying that there's almost a story at every level. Your company strategy is not like, achieve these 5 things. There is a narrative that's going on there. Then there's probably a narrative, at least if you work in a large enough company at a product suite level. Then there's a narrative down to your product and feature level. And to your point, Lynn, these things have to tie together, because if I don't relate with any of those levels, my level of motivation as anyone who's working on the ground floor is just not there. There's also a sense here, as you talk about coherence, Lynn, which is around back to, do I believe this or not, right? And the mind is really, really quick to find inconsistencies. And it's not just it's believing and whether that inconsistency is there or not, but it's also how motivated am I to act on that. That comes from me thoroughly seeing the narrative, connecting with it, and then acting on it. And we as product managers, we worry a lot about velocity. Hey, the velocity is not there. And we're putting all these things in place around, are we measuring velocity, how many story points, whatnot. But there is this deeper level of motivation. When it's there, I've seen that all those velocity things just go out of the window because people want to get those things done. They really deeply care, and they would stay nights, they would do whatever it takes to get it done. And so that's another reason where the coherence piece is so important. It makes you believe, it motivates you.
Absolutely. So tactically, folks, I always recommend, like I said, you got to get on the street. Once COVID's over, you need to be on the road, talking to customers, going to those strategic account meetings so you're gathering the stories. Also start to record some of the conversations. And even if you're on the phone with a client, record it so you can play it to your engineers. Because it's not just about you describing what the user is going through, but hearing the emotion and the frustration and exactly all the nonverbal cues that are needed to really understand the context. And when you do that, the engineers are going to go right into that user and they're going to get it. And they're going to want to solve their problem because it's personal now.
Yeah, and also maybe bring one of the engineers.
Absolutely, yes.
That'd be fantastic.
All right, so does that anything else, any other questions on these stories from a work perspective? Because next we're going to talk about our personal story. You need to have personal stories as well. All right, so I'm going to use the same topic, coherence. Coherence in your personal stories. Absolutely critical. So for me, this is one of the secret sauces for really loving what you do. Your personal story, what you believe, your values, what do you care about? What puts you in a flow state? What geeks you out? What do you, for me, I geek out on the intersection of culture and technology. That's my jam. When you're working on a product that's coherent in an organization that has similar values to you, on a product that you care about, that you're passionate about, that aligns with your broader outlook. You've got coherence, just like my story with my dad and Shobit's story. It was coherent. There's a thread. So as you think about your career, as you think about your personal story, to really, again, love what you do and be intentional, you need this coherence of what you want.
Yeah, Lynn, that's I totally agree with the coherence piece here. I'm also going to challenge like a different way of looking at it, or a different way of using the same thing, which is if you fast forward a year from now, 5 years from now, what's the story that you would have liked to have told? And the reason why story is so important here is because when we ask people, Lynn, I don't know if you have had this experience, which is like, where do you want to be 1 year from now or 5 years from now? It's like, okay, where I am, one step forward, right? Like that reimagination does not happen. But when they think of it as a story that they would have told, then, they let go of the constraints of the current, and they truly start to imagine and rethink fundamental assumptions about what they want in life, what they want from their jobs. And I think like just thinking of that future story and relating to it and believing it and internalizing it is so, so important. So important for your career, because that's really what's going to get you where you really want to go. Otherwise, you can get anywhere because you're not clear where you want to go.
Being a product manager is so much more than a job. Your career is so much more than a job, right? Work and life, I really don't believe you can separate them out. You want to do what you love and love what you do. So some questions, so I'm going to answer. Melissa has a couple good questions, is where in heaven's name do you start? Number one, I want you to think about when you get on your soapbox, what do you rant about? When you go to LinkedIn or Medium, what are the articles you click on because you want to click on them versus, I have to click on them? Think back to key moments where you were just on fire in your life, just on fire in college, after college. What were you doing? What got you excited? Yeah. Who do you want to be? When you think of yourself as a superhero, who do you want to be? And again, this is not about I want to work at Google. Nothing to do with the company. It's what sets you on fire. And if you go back and then you look at now, again, what do you rant about? What do you find really interesting?
Yeah. I'll add two more things to that, Lynn. That was really well put. One is, like, to your point, look to the past. Like, what have been things that you've been really proud of? And they might have been like super small. They might have been something as simple as acknowledging a coworker or recognizing your team or something small that didn't dramatically change your career trajectory, but you valued that. So I think like those are the moments that really give you a clue of what is the story you want to tell about yourself. And if anybody is like me and is sort of a journaling geek, like, that's where you'll find some of those stories that are really amazing. And second, I would challenge you to look outside of work. And, like for me, I look at my personal life and I realized that I was being like, like sort of fun, lighthearted, always telling funny stories. I'm known for terrible jokes. I haven't told any today, so don't worry, it will come.
Oh, bummer.
Yeah, it will come. And then at work, I was this like ultra serious dude who okay, get done, like be super polished. And I realized this like complete lack of, a different show that showed up at work. And once I changed that, things started to happen. So thinking of how you're outside work, and if you're fundamentally different at work, that's another area where you want to draw out that story that you want to tell for the future.
And another interesting thing of what you said, Shobit, is if you are showing up at work as a different person than you are at home, I like to say you're out of alignment. Mm-hmm. And you feel it. That's stress. It's that uncomfortableness that you're really not your authentic self. And that should be a pause. When you feel it in your body and you feel the stress, that's something, I'm doing something that's not in alignment with who I am.
It's like you're putting on a show for 8-10 hours a day. I mean, that's exhausting.
Yeah.
Super exhausting.
I talked to product managers. I talked to a product manager last year. She said to me, Lynn, my hair's falling out from the stress. This is big stuff, guys. When you're not, although storytelling is just a piece of it, but understanding your story, understanding what you want, being in alignment is a big deal in terms of your happiness, in terms of the quality of life. All right. So let's talk a little bit about interviewing and storytelling. So you want to kick this one off, Shobit, about how much of a story do you tell when you're interviewing?
Yeah. So everything is literally a story when you're doing interviews. Whether it's the most important one, which is tell me about yourself, just starting there, to even stuff like the product insight questions. What's the narrative you're telling there? So I think I'm just first going to focus on tell me about yourself, like that piece, and I think we both have pretty strong opinions on that. But in my mind, you're doing really three things with that when you're answering that question, right? Number one, if you have a clear narrative of what you're passionate about, what I do as an interviewer is I start to relate with you. And Lynn said earlier about, look, decisions are not made based on data. I'm not, as an interviewer, checking 10 boxes and saying, did you do this? Did you do that? I'm like, what's your narrative? Do I care about it? Can I believe it? And so that starts to happen right there when you tell me about yourself. The second big one is believability. There is a bullshit meter that's on. And when you have this narrative that is truly genuine, because like we have spidey senses, people can cut through bullshit and understand false things really fast. So, that starts to happen. I start to trust you. But the last thing I think that's very important is when you tell that story, you can determine where the interviewer focuses, right? You could like take that focus into something that's more aligned with your strengths, or you could take it to just like nowhere. And now the interview is just going to go down to the list of questions. That's why I think like that's a fundamental point where you've almost made or broken the interview. Then what are your thoughts on this topic?
Oh, absolutely agree. This is the hardest question in an interview. Tell me about yourself. And the thing is, when we talked about a minute ago, when you understand your stories and what you're passionate about, then that tell me about yourself is a little easier. Tell me about yourself is not a resume review. They already have your resume. It's a summary of what drives you, what motivates you, and how that ties into your career progression. And the thing is, let's use me as an example. I geek out about the world of technology and culture. If I were to interview at a fintech company, I couldn't fake it because I have zero interest in fintech. Again, this is where that alignment should be, and that passion and that interest will come out. And that tell me about yourself, you've got to rehearse it. And when you're interviewing, you actually need to have really good, as they ask you, you need to have a good EQ to understand how long or short it should be. Like if the person's leaning in and like they're into the story, then you keep going. If they're looking a little bored, looking at their paper, maybe shorten it. But again, it has to be emotive. It has to be really a good visual of who you are as a product manager. What are your superpowers? And tell me about how it all ties together with your career. A minute or two. Keep it nice and short.
Yeah.
All right. Any questions from the group on tell me about yourself? because that's just the first of storytelling with interviews.
Yeah, I think there's some in the chat like, okay, I think we answered how long should it be. Telling different stories if you're applying to different types of jobs. I think the core narrative probably doesn't change that much, but you are tweaking it, because if the core narrative is changing fundamentally, you're probably a little, all over the place. So that's also telling you how much in alignment you are with what you want and what you need. Maybe we're going too much into recruiting, but just one point where I've seen a lot of folks hedge quite a lot, especially in this economy when they're finding jobs, when they're looking for jobs. And, so that, what if I'm not for the job? So I got to like try 5 different things. And the problem is that you are robbing yourself of the opportunity with all those 5 different areas. So if you're changing it way too much, I think that it just tells you something about your job search overall.
And you're not going to be happy because you're not going to be in alignment with your stories. Have to be who you are and what you care about. If you're bullshitting your story through an interview, you're going to get there and you're not going to like it. Okay. Let's talk just really quickly about other stories from an interview perspective. This one this one's tough. When they ask you, tell me about a time when you had a conflict with management. When you're telling your stories, I refer to this as don't give me too much sausage making, right? We use the term sausage. Everybody understand what I say when you're making sausage in the world of product? The back and forth and all the nuances that happen in the world of product. When you're in an interview and they ask you a question, they want to hear about what happened with you, your story, in your relationships, in your interactions. They don't care about the details of what engineering did or the details of a specific reporting story you're telling about. They want to understand you and your behavior. And again, you want to bring them in. I was talking to senior leadership. Senior leadership was rolling their eyes when I was presenting the business case. Here's how I got around it. So when you're interviewing and telling stories, it's not about the sausage making. It's about you and what you did.
Yeah. Just 2 more points on that. I think some of us, including me, have a tendency of using the word we rather than I. And now you're suddenly downplaying your own role in that story. Like, just as Lynn mentioned, what exactly did you do? So I think that's really important. Like, just look out for how many times you used we rather than I. To the details, I agree with Lynn, like not too much sausage making, but some of the sensory details really matter, which is one of the biggest challenges I've seen is that product managers, they tell a story and, they achieve something great, but they never help the interviewer understand how big of a problem it really was that they solved. Like very often they had to go through a lot of struggle to change that direction to solve that problem. But in the interview, it appears like, oh yeah, I did this and then so-and-so happened and then I'm done. And, I've like sort of lost the context of the struggle that you went through. So do talk a little bit about the struggle just to make sure the interviewer understands that you did something really awesome.
All right. So Shobit and I aren't the only ones who love to talk about storytelling. I'd love it if you folks tell us a little bit about what you have seen work from a storytelling perspective. So I'd love it if you could just go off mute and just tell us. Tell us what you love about storytelling, what you've seen work. Think about your leaders and the good storytellers who you've interacted with. So this would be the participation part of the session.
I think, like you said, like having the emotion in there is really important. And like, as you were talking, I ended up sort of writing up my own story and realizing that there was this really painful moment I had like 4 years ago, that like I haven't wanted to talk about, but I think it's what makes my story compelling. And it's like the fact that I was fired as an engineer because I thought too much outside the box. And I was always asking, why should we do this? And like, it was really painful to be fired as an engineer, but it really guided me towards this role where I'm now excelling for the same reasons that they said I wasn't a very good engineer.
Perfect. Charlie, that is exactly what I'm talking about. Your pain brought you to where you are today.
And I think like Charlie, to that point, we sometimes have a tendency to cover up those pieces because they are embarrassing. Like, what? You got fired? And we feel that other people will judge us. But that doesn't happen when you're telling a story. So like that, letting go of that fear of judgment is just opens up storytelling dramatically.
And what I love about this, anybody a Brene Brown fan out there? So the V word, vulnerability. The more you can show your personal vulnerability as part of your storytelling, that builds that emotional connection, that trust. Again, whether you're interviewing or telling a story of a customer or telling the story of a buyer. Other examples of just storytelling and what you've seen work. Or you think about a leader who is a great storyteller and what did they do?
I think some of the stories that I've seen work are like, I feel like they're sort of have a lot of personal details, but also there's an arc to the story. Just like if you're watching like a TV show or something, there's some sort of initial context and, struggle. And then there's some sort of resolution that may be a little bit surprising or cathartic or something. So I think those are the kinds of true stories like that have a lot of appeal.
Absolutely.
Oh, it's 8:20.
Okay, so is that my 2-minute warning, Nina? Oh, I can't hear her.
My booming voice is telling you it's 8:20.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we're going to do one more quick question on storytelling, which is probably the hardest people to tell a story to. And that is when you're trying to get senior leadership to buy off on an idea. Okay, you're talking to the chief product officer, the CEO, and you've got this awesome product idea. How do you use storytelling when trying to convince them? Shobit, let's hear some ideas.
Yeah, I'll give 2 ideas, and then I'm sure you also have other ideas. Like number 1 is before they buy into your solution, make sure they buy into the problem, right? Is it something that it's worth solving? And literally on the first phase, all I would try to convince them is this is a big problem for either the company or it's a big problem for my customers. Ideally, both. Big. And, once they buy in, then you can tell them all about what the wonderful solution is. But that's the biggest one. Second, I think here really shaping the story to what they personally care about. And one of the things here is keeping track of what they personally care about. And, this might sound a little geeky, but that's okay, which is like, I literally keep track of all the various stakeholders I interact with. Like, what are places where I saw them get engaged, or like, what are ideas that I saw them got excited with? And if I can tie things together to what matters to them personally, I think that is in itself just a huge win when you're telling that executive level story. And I'll say one more thing before turning over. I know I said 2, but I'll add one more, which is just don't put yourself under the pressure to tell this great story in this large room and suddenly expect to impress everyone. Somebody mentioned shuttle diplomacy as a concept. I think you've got to own that for any major thing that's happening, where it's those one-on-one conversations where you're really getting the buy-in. And then the final approval meeting is just, yeah, okay, we have everyone's buy-in. Now let's get it stamped and get going. Yeah, so those were the 3 things for me.
Absolutely. And the other couple things I would add to that is, as you're coming up with these product ideas, a little bit more on the shuttle diplomacy, go up, you run those ideas past the VP of engineering or the VP of product and say, just the 5 minutes, I want to whiteboard some ideas I'm thinking about. So you're getting that senior level input. Not only are they buying into your ideas, but they're part of the idea. I'm a big believer in collaboration, idea generation through crowdsourcing. So shuttle diplomacy, have people add to the idea, have people get engaged. And then again, if I could give you one word when telling a story, it's imagine. When you're thinking about something in the future, imagine 5 years from now, and here's our user and what they're doing. It's a very powerful statement, just that one word when you're doing the value prop.
Yeah, and I'll give you 3 words rather than 1 word. Often when you start to tell a story, it's all about, have you ever? Like sort of, have you ever felt this? And have you ever had this challenge? And that also dramatically changes things quite a lot.
All right, so what we're gonna do now, guys, is I'm gonna spend a couple minutes. How many people? We have 24 people here. I'm gonna break us out into probably 3 groups, okay? And while I'm manually doing that, Charlie's gonna talk about a little bit about the mentorship program and her experience.
Yeah, so I started in product management 3 years ago and had no experience in it. And the BPMA mentorship program was so immensely helpful. My first mentor, Emra, just sort of walked me through, like, here's what it looks like at various companies. Wow, your company's weird in this way, but this is more typical. Sort of helped me understand, like, okay, that kind of thing where, like, the founders of the company are very strong-willed and it's hard to, like, have your own product vision. Yep, that's a classic thing at startups. And it was really helpful to get my feet under me. And then a year later, I had another mentor, Bruce, and he sort of walked me through, my company was doing a reorg and I had an opportunity to pick which role I wanted to ask for and sort of position myself for. And it was really helpful to have his guidance in that time. And now I actually have a third mentor, Beth, who's helping me see how my technical background sometimes sort of gets me a little bit too much into the how, and being able to focus more on the why and help guide people to understand the problem so others can help solve it is a little more valuable. So I've been a mentee 3 times and it's been amazing every time. And now I think I'm ready to be a mentor. So just wanted to let everybody know how awesome the mentorship program is, so that if you're not involved, you go get involved.
All right, awesome.